Hello, everybody on live. I am a PhD student currently at the Alfred-Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven, Germany. I work on Arctic phytoplankton dynamics as they respond to climate change and increasing temperatures in Svalbard. So my field work is in Svalbard in a place called Njálesund, which is on it's in Kongsfjorden, which is on the island of Spitsbergen, and so that's specifically where I am working. And my background is typically it's very phytoplankton heavy, but I've done all sorts of things from primatology to fishery science. But phytoplankton was the one thing that kind of stuck. So I've been working in phytoplankton physiology, phytoplankton optics, and like ecophysiology, so a lot of like biological oceanography things. And I've been working on some long-term monitoring projects, but all very much about primary production and photosynthesis in the ocean.
So as I was also just reading through it, so your work is basically focused on temperature, effect of temperature due to climate change on phytoplankton.
Yes.
The item to be specific. So in what aspect you are seeing the changes, like their abundance, or in what sense you are looking kind of change?
We are specifically interested in community development. So what are the different species that are in each season? So it's actually a very cool study. So in Svalbard, for the most part, the springtime, the summertime are really well studied for phytoplankton because there's typically a big phytoplankton bloom that happens in the spring. And so those kinds of things have been characterized. And in fact, my PhD advisor that I work with, Clara Hapa, she has been working in that area in Kongsfjorden for 10 years. And so she's been monitoring the same fjord site for 10 years. But nobody's ever really done it on a full year-long scale. So we're doing this project where we have kind of like a time series that is going across the entire year. And then we have also these seasonally resolved experiments that are temperature-based. And so we're looking at increasing temperatures and how community development changes with these temperatures and what that means for phytoplankton in the future as temperatures continue to increase. So, yeah.
So your work also involves about a bit of taxonomy, if I'm not
A little bit, yeah. It's a little bit of phytoplankton identification, stuff like that, because we have a really cool instrument called the flow cam, in which we take samples and we're able to take pictures of each individual cell that's passing through. And then we can kind of put these into different categories. And we don't necessarily get to like species level, but we get general groups, and so we can identify different types of diatoms, for example, diatoms being a major group of phytoplankton that are really ecologically important. So we can sort of do that kind of work, but it's a little bit harder to do like species identification, and that I reserve to the taxonomists. I'm not quite a taxonomist, but yeah.
And what about your sample collection? I have seen some of the shots of you collecting samples with Clara, your PI.
Yes.
So how cool is that, and how you go and collect the sample?
It's super. I am really a boat person. I love boats, and so
and apparently you know how to ride also. I think, if I'm not getting wrong, how to
yeah, I can drive some boats. Yes, that's true. But yeah, most of our sample collection, I mean, what's really cool about phytoplankton work that I find is really fascinating is that we use the most simple techniques there is, right? Like it's really that we go out into the ocean, we collect water, and then we filter it on these glass fiber filters with vacuum filtration. And then we're able to get all of these different parameters that then make up this like complexity of the world of photosynthesis in the ocean. But like at the bare minimum, right? You just go out into the ocean and you collect water. Like that's the whole concept. And so we use what are called Niskin bottles. And so they are these bottles that are able to be closed at different depths. And so Some people have, when you're on the bigger ships, they typically have mechanisms that you're able to close them through electronics, and then you're able to do it via computers and so on. But then when you do it manually, when you have just one bottle, like we do in Svalbard, we lower the bottle down to the depth, and we use like an echo sounder to figure out what the depth the bottle is at. And then you're able to close the bottle using a messenger weight, and you send the weight down, and it hits a little mechanism, and the bottle snaps shut at a specific depth, and that's how we do it for the most part.
Oh, that took me back to my master's classes, when we studied all this method of collection. Though I have never
Yeah.
got that opportunity to do that, but definitely sounds so cool.
It really is, and it's really one of those things that I think is, again, right, like this really simple method, right, and it gives you all of this complexity about these organisms that are single-celled, that are driven by light, so it's a really remarkable, for me it's really remarkable, because it combines, like, not only the process of collecting the water, so the biology of it, but then you're also looking at light, and you're looking at the physics, the optics, and also the chemistry of the water, and all of these things. And so it's yeah, it's amazing what you can do with one water sample is really what it
Yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah, sounds so interesting. So, as you were just mentioning that, like your background is quite, phytoplankton heavy.
hmm
So I was just going through a bit of it. So how it all started? Was it like 6 or 7 years back when you studied the, photo assimilation in diatoms in Rutgers?
No, so in fact, I never thought I was going to become anything related to marine science. I never thought I was going to go into marine science. I really had no, I mean, because frankly, really, one of the things is, right, you don't see a lot of people of color in marine science, right? It's predominantly, like, it's dominated by the people who come from the Western academic tradition, right? And I mean, my parents have really no concept of this, or like even higher education for that matter. I mean, they finished their bachelor's degree in India, and then when they moved to America, they never pursued anything further than that. So the idea of also doing like a master's degree or a PhD is not something that was common in my family. So I'm like one of the first people to do that. But the original thought is that, like, I never thought that I was going to do this, because I didn't see people who looked like me in this field. And in my mind, I was really interested at first in epigenetics. I was interested in neurodegenerative diseases. I was like, oh, maybe I'd do something along the lines of more medical science, because I was curious about these kinds of processes. And I sent out an app, like, not really an application, but like a cold email, essentially, right? They had urged us in our undergraduate to find these research opportunities, and so they said, email people that you think are interesting. And so one of the things that my first ever advisor was studying was this evolutionary biology, like the origin of life type of things. And I said, oh, this might be interesting. But the first thing that he put me onto was a project about phytoplankton. And it was putting phytoplankton at different light levels and seeing how they respond through acclimation. And I don't know, from that point in time, it just kept going, and I just kept doing more phytoplankton work. But I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to stay in this, right? So I tried all of these other things. So I was in fishery science, where I was doing fish physiology, but also like, it was kind of and in fact, this is the only paper that I'm published on, where I jokingly say that I'm a fisheries expert, but it's a project on how climate change affects the ability to catch certain types of fish. And then I was also doing like fish dissections and all of these kinds of things. And then I was also briefly in primatology, because I thought at one point I was like, maybe I'll do some primatology. And so I was interested in the molecular biology of stress response in orangutans. And so I was like looking at some of that kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, the list continues. I tried to do as many things as I possibly could, but at the end of the day, it was primary productivity and phytoplankton that really stuck in my in my brain, and that too
Yeah,
in
I guess.
polar regions. So yeah.
Yeah, it was destined. And like I just remembered that leaving no stone unturned. So you tried
Yeah.
everything, it seems.
I tried to.
Yeah,
I
and
tried to. You know, especially in America, when you have to pay so much for your education, you know, you got to make the most of it.
true, true, true. And was it of that only that you have worked also on, cell lines and all during that
No, so actually,
time period? When you
so that was actually different. So I briefly, at the end of my bachelor's degree, I was kind of I kind of wanted to take a break really because I had done so much in the 4 years that I had done my bachelor's. I was like, oh, maybe I should take a break and then start a new project, start a PhD or something of those lines. I knew I wanted to do higher education, but I just didn't know what timeline I was kind of looking at. And so I got this job to do to take care of cell lines, neuronal cell lines in an epilepsy lab that they were looking at. They were looking at how epilepsy, like molecular mechanisms of epilepsy and things of that nature. And that was really interesting experience as well to take care of those cell lines and look at how those cells grow. And after doing so much culture work in phytoplankton, I was like, wow, these are different cells, but same concept. Yeah. Hmm.
So that did not divert you to, you had a chance to
No,
shift.
I think at the end of the day, I was fascinated with the idea of being on expedition and doing field work, and I think I was not really destined to be in the lab for my science life. And so, I mean, being in labs, but being in field labs and putting
Mhm.
like field measurements
Mhm.
into context, I think is really where I
Mhm.
am most interested.
So after that, you went for your master's.
Yeah. So I did my master's in Quebec City at Université Laval, and where I started more specifically working in polar science. And so I was looking at a type of Arctic phytoplankton and how they responded to extreme low light. Because there's this concept of, well, you have these single-celled organisms that are the base of the marine food web, right? And they're entirely light-driven organisms, but they live in places where they don't have light for 6 months out of the year, simplistically.
Mhm.
But I mean, the amount of light, in fact, is more than we think in polar night, and the productivity that happens in polar night is actually um, more significant than we previously thought. And so now being able to understand what are these adaptations that exist in these organisms that allow them to survive and produce this huge amount of biomass that then supports all of these upper trophic levels, right? So all of these whales and seals and fish and zooplankton and so on, right, depend on these phytoplankton in order to survive. And so it's a really fascinating world of these extreme adaptations that exist in phytoplankton.
And during that time, you worked on, transcriptomic changes in diatom.
Yes, so that's where I sort of blended transcriptomics and physiology together to sort of see where um, what we see in the physiology and then how that's represented in the genetics of the phytoplankton. And I only did this on a one species of phytoplankton,
Mhm.
Fragilaria cylindrus, which is really it's actually a species that was found in the Antarctic, but they found also some populations in the Arctic too. So they're in both polar regions. And so it's been known as kind of like a model organism to work with in the lab. And so in fact, a lot of the stuff that I did in my master's was very lab based, but then I got the ability to go on one of my first bigger expeditions, which was on the Amundsen, which is actually the research vessel of Université Laval. And it's managed by the Canadian Coast Guard, but that specific ship is meant purely just for research science, which is really cool. It's a really state-of-the-art research vessel that is equipped with so many different labs and so many different people can work on it. So I met all of these people who are working on everything from chemistry to physics to biology and all sorts of biology at that too. So it was really cool. Yeah.
And that led to your, as you were telling, to Antarctica. You were there for 6 months.
So so in total, I've spent 10 months in Antarctica, at
Okay.
Palmer Station specifically, so across 2 field seasons. And interestingly enough, Antarctica was related to my bachelor's degree, where I had one person that I worked with who did a lot of polar courses, or specifically Antarctic courses, because I went to Rutgers for my bachelor's degree, and Rutgers has this huge they have this huge glider program and they have a huge glider program and a huge Antarctic program. And so they send these gliders all over the place, but then they also have this long-term ecological research program that has been at Palmer Station for 30 years. And so they've been taking these measurements for 30 years, but they also have not only the station measurements, but they also have a ship that does a transect every single year, although I think that they're changing that now, but they were doing this every single year, where they did this transect and they did all of these different stations for most of the West Antarctic Peninsula. And so being part of that project was really cool, because it kind of shows you, like, even though you're taking the same measurements every single day, you're seeing the importance of it in a long-term scale, which I think is really important for us now.
And how did you connect with the dots there? How you got in,
Oh,
touch with?
so right, sorry, that was the original question.
No,
um,
it was included. What you answered here.
well, so in my undergraduate, some of the courses that I took were very Antarctic based, because I had these advisors. So even my advisors working in phytoplankton at the time, they were very Antarctic based, and so they had this ability that you could go to Antarctica as an undergraduate, but I was never really able to, unfortunately. Like, I never got the chance in my undergraduate to go. But it wasn't until later that they kind of phoned me up and they were like, hey, what do you think about going to Antarctica and like working and being part of this long-term ecological research? And I was like, yeah, of course. I mean, when someone asks you to go to Antarctica, the answer is obviously yes.
It's a dream call, I would say.
Yeah, it was really a cool experience, and also to be like personally asked, right? Because this is an advisor that I had in previous years, and so it was nice for someone to be like, oh, this is like an opportunity for you, like you should do this. And so it was yeah, it was very cool. And so I spent 6 months at Palmer Station for the first time that I went there, and then I decided to come back for a second season, and I was supposed to actually stay there for 6 months again, but then I got this offer to start my PhD, and I was like, I think I should continue on in my research career, and I was like, okay, I think I don't mean to leave things unfinished, but I think it's time for me to continue moving on. Yeah.
And you are completely inside PhD.
Yeah. So now, quite literally but what's crazy is quite literally that this year, I started my PhD this year, but I was in Antarctica. I got the project to come to do this PhD, and then I was like in Svalbard. So it was like within a few months, I was, from South Pole to North Pole, like very
Yeah.
yeah, it was very
And
crazy. But
how it is, how different you feel the waters there to different
so
poles.
So a lot of the work that I was doing in Antarctica, the system is a little bit different, because it was a little bit more of an open ocean system. But here in Svalbard, it's a bit more closed because it's a fjord. And what's interesting about the fjord is that it's almost like a lake. It's almost like a lake, except it has these deposits of Atlantic water that's been coming in.
Yeah.
So you have these warm pockets of water that have been coming in, and then also with the glaciers melting, you have these nutrient deposits that are also nutrients that are coming through the sediments, mixing through the system. So it's like a very unique fjord system that's there. So it's a little bit different than sampling more of the open ocean, where there's a little bit more of movement and circulation between water masses, but. Yeah, I mean, the concept the concept of the sampling itself, though, is fairly similar. So it's like kind of doing the same type of work that I have been doing, but it's interesting to do it in different places. Yeah.
And whenever it comes to, about working in poles, whether it's about Antarctica or Arctic, we always, fantasize it. But I would like to ask what all the, difficulties you faced during, actually when you were in Antarctica, because I was going through some of your posts that there was some time out of running water, and so all, difficult issues you faced there
Yeah.
during your
So,
visit.
so I think so. I'll start with the Arctic, just because in the Arctic, I was actually very surprised with this because I started in the Antarctic, but in the Arctic, it's a lot more. I guess I would say accessible compared to Antarctica. And I mean, it's because real people live there, right? Like real people live in the Arctic, and they have lived in the Arctic for a lot longer than Antarctica has been explored. So one of the things I think is really interesting is that in the Arctic, you have this ability, at least in Njalsund, the research station, you have the ability to, like, you have two planes that arrive every week, and so you have the ability to stay for like 3 days if you felt like it, and then you can leave. Whereas in the Antarctic, at least where I was in Palmer Station, it is 4 days by ship before you can like get help or anything like that. So once you arrive at the station, you're very much at the station. um, so I think that is a little bit interesting and difficult depending on what kind of person you are, because station life is also very different than being on a ship, I would say, because when you're on a ship, usually your campaigns are shorter. I mean, although there are some people who have long campaigns on ships too, but like usually it's a very intense period of time for a shorter period of time. Whereas station life, you have a little bit longer of a time, and you have to manage not only your research life, but you also have to manage being a real person too, because you're not working, like it's not 24-hour ops, for example. Like on a research vessel, typically they do 24 hours. They do CTD casts, for example, which they collect water at all times of the day. But that's not the way that it really works on a station. Um, and so you have to manage being a real person and also being a scientist at the same time, which I think can be challenging for some people. And also being able to manage, like, I mean, what's really nice is that you have internet, so you are connected to your world at home. But in some ways, that can also be a little bit anxiety inducing, because you're kind of you're kind of isolated, but you're not. Like you're like almost as if you're looking through like a museum exhibition of like all of your friends' lives, but you are on this side of the glass, So that can be a little bit more, that can be a little bit challenging. For me, sometimes it's hard to, I mean, when you do long-term time series things, sometimes it's hard to do the same thing every single day. So sometimes I wish I had more variety. And sometimes I also wish that, like in Antarctica, I wish I could, like, sometimes just take a break, go somewhere else, and then come back and like start working again. Like that would be nice.
There
Sometimes I'm
is no
like,
way.
well, sometimes I'm like, it'd be nice if I could just walk down the street and get a coffee at the coffee shop and then come back to work, like just to have some like
Yeah.
separation of work-life balance or so on. So sometimes that can be hard. And I mean, and also depending on who you work with too, right? Like if you don't have a team that you really mesh well with, then it can also be really challenging. Um, and yeah, I mean, those are some of the bigger things. And then the other things, of course, like more logistical things, right? Sometimes obviously things just don't go well in the field, right? Like you either miss sampling, the weather doesn't cooperate. I mean, your life is driven by the weather. I'm constantly looking at the weather. How high is the wind, whether or not there's precipitation, whether, like, all of these things make it really 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 sometimes difficult to manage, right? You have to see and like capitalize on your opportunities to sample. And so sometimes you just don't get those opportunities. And that can also be really hard, to be sitting inside and not doing anything. You have some downtime, and I mean, it's not like you can go outside anyway, right? Because it's storming, so you can enjoy the outdoors regardless. So
Yeah.
that can be hard too.
So, so what do you do there to keep yourself, entertained? I know you have minored in music, so
Yes.
What activities do you
So
do?
a lot of people we do like with the community is really important in these kinds of places. And so it's really important to like have community events and do things like that. I mean, at Palmer Station, we used to watch series together. We used to like we have craft nights, or we also have bands and we perform music and we do all of these kinds of things. In Nyalesund, we have opportunities to go outside a lot. So, I mean, a lot of people take cabin trips and they do things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, but also in all of these places, there's been a gym, there's been like a lounge, a bar space, you know, to hang out and enjoy. I mean, you keep yourself busy also with all the science. I mean, there's always data entry to be doing. So there's a lot of data entry, but then other things that I enjoy doing definitely. I try to I try to first and foremost I try to keep in touch with my friends, and I definitely try to make time for sending messages or even doing like video calls or whatever, as much as the internet allows, because the internet's not always great, but as much as you can. And then I spend a lot of time outside. I have a lot of outdoor hobbies, and so I enjoy being able to hike around outside. It was really cool at Palmer Station that we were at a base of a glacier. So we were able to use the glacier as recreation. So I would go skiing on the glacier. We would do hiking on the glacier, and it was really cool to also see the seasons change, right? So skiing wouldn't happen all year round, but at least for the beginning part of the season, there would be good amount of snow that you could ski. Um, and also at Palmer Station, we were able to do a little bit of recreational boating, and so that was really nice too. Um, since I've only been to Svalbard, so this was only my first 2 month stay in Svalbard, and so I still have a year's worth of field stays coming up, and so there's lots that I still need to discover about that place. But I mean, the things that we did, I also did a lot of cross country skiing there. What's cool about Svalbard is that they also have dogs, and so you can go sledding with
Oh,
dogs, which is really fun. It's really cute. It was really wonderful. Yeah, and I mean, and in Nyalesund there was a lot of community events too. So we would celebrate. We would have nice dinner every Saturday, for example, and so it was like a very nice thing to bring the community together and things like that. Yeah.
and you still have taste buds for Indian foods?
Say that again?
You have taste buds for Indian food?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
And do you get it at these
Some
stations?
I would say that at Palmer Station, so we have chefs. So we have chefs at Nyalesund, and we had chefs on board the ship. We had chefs, and depending on the chef, right, it's like the creativity of each individual person. So some chefs decide to make other cuisines from other places, and some don't. I would say that the food, for the most part, has been fine. It's been really fine, and honestly very delicious for the fact that we're in a remote space, and often we run out of fresh foods and fruits and vegetables and things like that, and they do a really good job of keeping us fed, and also with a variety of different foods too. So absolutely. But it is one of the things that I miss, because I really like to cook a lot. And so not being able to be a little bit more in control of my meals and some of that is a little bit challenging in the field. But I've learned to sort of just like, it's fuel, you know?
Yeah. You have to keep yourself running.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And as you were just mentioning about this field works and all, so I just remembered that you have gone for field visit in Mongolia as well.
Yeah. So this is one of my
How was
fisheries
that?
projects. This is one of my fisheries projects where I spent it was I think the better part of a summer in Mongolia, and that was probably the
Mhm.
most remote I've ever been, where I really had no connection to anyone in that time. There we
Oh,
had a like a satellite phone, and we had like a shared message box where you could send messages to this box and everyone would see your messages, but it was like
oh,
purely for the fact that like you could just tell your family that you're alive. But I didn't even bother doing And I told my parents. I told my parents and my friends and and other people. I was just like, I'm gonna be here, and if you hear nothing, that is good. That is really great. But yeah, that was really cool. Cool project to be a part of, where we were looking at. This was the project where we were looking at how climate change affects the ability to catch fish in this river system, and we were in two different camps, which was really interesting. And it was not like the steppe as people think of Mongolia, but it was very wooded and hilly, and it was much closer to Russia. It was very northern Mongolia. And that was a really cool experience. And it's also a published research, so you could definitely check it out
Yeah,
and read
yeah.
it.
I was just, yeah, I was going through the abstract. So, what was the actual crux of that? Does this thunders and all do affect the
So
catchability?
So in fact it does, because largely because it increases the turbidity of the rivers, and so you're seeing the erosion of all of these river banks, and so it does make it harder to catch fish. Which some fish are very visual when they're hunting, I suppose, or the feeding ecology changes. And I mean, we didn't necessarily make any claims about the feeding ecology using through this study, but at least for the most part, we separated it between fly fishing and spin fishing. And so two different styles of fishing, essentially. And we were catching different sizes of fish between these two. And also we were linking this to stage measurements, so how high the river was at given points in time, and then also turbidity measurements, how much stuff is in the water. So yeah, it was a really cool experience to be part of. There was that aspect of that project, which was very much fisheries ecology. And then the other parts of the project were also a little bit more anthropological, which my background is also biological anthropology. So it was really cool to be able to talk to the herders that were living in these areas. And we were discussing about what their relationship is to the land, and how that's evolved with the change that they see in the seasons, right? Because while people think of Mongolian herders as nomadic, these people in this region were considered semi-nomadic, because they would have a camp in the wintertime and then a camp in the summertime, and they would switch between the two, but they had more of like a permanent structure at these two camps. And so kind of going between those two, it's more of a semi-nomadic lifestyle. And so depending on the seasons, and the seasons have been shifting with climate change. That's probably one of the more clear signs of climate change, is that you're seeing these seasonal shifts. The times of the seasons are changing. And so when they were moving towards camps was changing depending on these summer storms, and also as like, the seasonal shifts, like when autumn would begin and when certain plants would arrive, and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, like its title itself is quite, interesting to read. Like, okay, even a thunderstorm can have, like, we do think logically it will have, but articulating that in a paper is really a fascinating thing.
Yeah, it is really cool. And I think it's also happening more so in the bigger ocean too, right? Like you're seeing an increase in these storms that are then mixing the water masses that would otherwise remain stratified. And so you're also changing. That also has a lot of impact on the phytoplankton, for example, right? Because if you increase the amount that you're mixing, right, you sort of, not all of these phytoplankton are seeing the same amount of light, and so it changes the way that they respond as well. So I would be interested, I think maybe a postdoc, who knows, but learning about those kinds of things moving forward. Yeah.
Here you are, 6 months and PhD, and you have already planned for
You
that.
got to think big. You got to think big. You have all these ideas, right? So all these plans that I have in the back of my head about
Yeah,
where
true.
and what you're gonna do and what you're interested in. So,
True, and actually, there's quite a fascinating question. Like, you have worked on a bit of quite different field of natural science.
hmm
So when I was deciding my PhD, like I did my bachelor's in microbiology, then I did master's in marine biology, then finally I did taxonomy for PhD. So initially I used to hear that you have to be, if you want to go in academics, academia, then you have to follow the same
mm
almost same sort of research area. But hearing from you seems like being able to work on a different feel a bit here and there exposure that has helped you to, in a different aspect of your current research. Is
Yeah,
it?
definitely. I think I've never been really good at doing just one thing. I'm not maybe like, a master of one subject, but I think I have my toes in all of these different pools. And I'm like really fascinated about how all of these things kind of come together to work. And so I think having an interdisciplinary approach, I think, is the next
Mm-hmm.
level, right, is to bringing people together through collaboration. And I'm really big on this, and I want to work with
Mm-hmm.
people who are good at different things, and I want to be able to synthesize across those things. And I think not only have I learned a lot of skills from all of these different things, but I also find a lot of
Mm-hmm.
similarity between all of the things that I've been doing, right? I mean, it's taught me how to manage a field season, for example, right? Like that doesn't change no matter whether I'm in Mongolia, whether I'm in Antarctica, whether I'm in the Arctic. It doesn't matter, right? Like it's like, how do you organize yourself? So that's one
Mm-hmm.
thing. And then the other thing is, right, like being able to also work across disciplines and working with people with different backgrounds is also really important, I think. And I've been really, really lucky to have such an international career in science. And so I've worked with all sorts of people from all different types of backgrounds, all different types of disciplines. And so it's really cool to be the product, a mosaic of all of these things too. So I think that is really special. Um, and I think like this is the part that gets you thinking about what are the next big questions, right? Next big questions to ask scientifically. And I think there's value in being very good at one particular protocol or very one type of science or so. But I also think, like especially oceanography, I think you would be doing a great disservice if you weren't looking at all of these aspects, because there's so many different levels to what we're looking at. And I mean, phytoplankton is a clear example of that, right? You have the optics, the physics of optics, that of the light that's moving through the water, and that too also through the cell. And then you have the chemistry that impacts the way that they take up nutrients. And then on top of that, you have pure biology, right? The physiology that's happening within the cell too. So it's all of these things. And now we're even using all of these omics approaches, right, to understand these really, really tiny microorganisms. So it's really interdisciplinary. And I think having an ability to synthesize across all these disciplines is really, really beneficial for science moving forward.
Yeah, and this integrated part, like you how you're connected with this program, YESSS, that year round.
Yes, it's yes.
Yes.
It's the greatest
Okay,
acronym
yes.
there is.
Yeah.
It's called the Yes
Yeah.
Project. Yeah.
Yeah. So how you came in contact with this project, or you approached, or they approached for that?
So in
How it
fact,
started?
it was a call for applicants for PhDs. And so the way that the Alfred-Wegener Institute works is that you apply for a PhD like you would a job. And this project really piqued my interest because not only was it my background, more or less, like I was like, I read this and I was like, this is the project, right? And what was really cool for me was the fact that we're part of this cohort. So it's not just me, but we have three other PhD students who are also part of this project, looking at this year-round ecosystem study on Svalbard. And so I am responsible for the phytoplankton part. There's another PhD student who's responsible for the macroalgae, so the seaweed. There's another PhD student who's doing sea urchin work. And then finally, there's also another student who's doing polar cod, who I think is actually our mutual friend, Max.
Yeah, next.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and marine science is such a small world, so it's really cool to be running into people who know. And there's Max in the comments. Hi, Max.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, such a small world. Yes.
yeah. So it's super cool to like be a part of this like interdisciplinary project, right? And that reflects my views in science as well. And then on top of this, we also have the like even cooler thing about this project is we not only have this like core biology monitoring that we're doing over the course of this whole year, but the other parts of this project we're looking at how can we present these results to the public, right? And so we have this whole media component where we're responsible for doing science communication, which I think the emphasis on science communication is really important to me. And I think a lot of the times it's easy to get caught up in doing science, but not being able to share the work that you're doing, I think is like, you know, that should be some of our focus, right? Being able to present the science to just regular people, right? And being able to talk about it in a really like simple way, I think is really important. And so we have this aspect of it where we're also doing a lot of science communication as part of our work. And then the other part is that we're also working with modelers to then present a model to sort of be able to predict the changes as the years go on. So from this year-long study, trying to put all of these components together and identify how this ecosystem is going to change with increasing climate change.
So like modeling on entire ecosystem, not specifically about phytoplankton or so.
Yeah.
About whole ecosystem here, right?
Yes.
Modeling a whole ecosystem, how it will change with time and as time goes on.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, very well mentioned, like communicating science is such a, you know, specifically now, I think now it's becoming a more, you know, integral part of any study. And coming to that point, we also talk a lot about, you know, women in science. So I was just, you know, I just wanted to ask, being a woman in science, you felt any difficulties, what you felt like it was just because you are a woman in science, you faced that? You had come across any such situation?
I think I've been really fortunate to have a lot of female role models in marine science too, because there have been a lot of women who have now taken on more like I would say leadership roles in marine science, which is really cool to see. But I do think it is still predominantly a very male dominated field, I would say. And so sometimes I think it's possible that like I don't think it's necessarily on purpose or anything of that sort, but like it's just like a disconnect in the way that communication is happening. And so sometimes it's like we fall into these old patterns of old academia where we find that, you know, it's this ivory tower and it's like a very exclusive way of discussing academics. And it's not always a very inclusive space, or there's not always space for all different voices to be heard. And I mean, I feel this way as well. What's interesting is, right, like I really didn't know about marine science outside of the US, outside of Europe, for example, because this is the world that I was thrust into, right? But like there's a beautiful community of people doing marine science, doing phytoplankton work outside of these places that are, you know, the main voices that you hear in journals and everything. And I think one thing for me, I think it's important to do the science communication, not only because people see me, right, as a person of color and also a woman doing science that necessarily wasn't like, I guess, historically inclusive. So I think that is like a really important part for me, also being an oceanographer and being in marine science. So I think I've been very fortunate to have the opportunities that I've had, and I've had a lot of advisors believe in me and give me the opportunities to do wonderful things. But I'm also aware that like that's not the case everywhere, you know. So yeah. So and I'm hoping that like by doing more science communication and by showing people that they can do these things, right, and by talking about how I got interested in these things and how I like started working in these different fields, right, that other people are also inspired to do those things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite true. Like, you know, I won't name, but being in a research institute which has, you know, scientific results and all, I also hear stories where, you know, sometimes women don't get to participate in the cruises, citing the fact that like they are women and which comes with certain responsibility, which, you know, particular crew members, they don't want to take on their
Yeah,
shoulders. So
absolutely.
I
And
feel that.
but another thing to that, right, is that in field work, it is a dangerous place for a lot of people, right? Because a lot of people feel that they have the ability to get away with a lot of things, and they often, whether it be like harassment in many different forms happens, and it's an unfortunate part of field work. And that's also something that, like, people have been trying to bring to light and try to make these places a lot safer for people. But I mean, polar science is also one of the highest rates of harassment,
Oh,
unfortunately, because I think it's so much more remote than other types of science that's the case, that people think that they can behave in a certain way and not face the consequences of their behaviors. And so I know, at least for the Antarctic program in the US, that they're trying to um, increase the awareness of these kinds of things, have more ways to let people talk about the things that they're experiencing in the field. And yeah, also in the comments, someone just said, certainly the case in India, women are flat out refused to go on research cruises. And yeah, it's like this kind of mentality, I think, also in other places. I mean, it's a deterrent, right, for a lot of people to pursue marine science and go forward in their careers. Yeah.
yeah. I think there's a a miles to go. Uh, At least at present, we have a lot to do better.
Yeah.
And usually is in spite of and rather making situations better for them. It ultimately comes to the
Mhm.
women that because we don't want to take effort to create that environment, so it's better to just stop them to get in. I
Yeah.
hope that gets better with time. Change is inevitable and change is the only constant. So I hope that gets
Yeah,
better.
I do
And
too.
yeah, so and coming to the almost to the end of it, would you like to give any advice because you have been through different sort of research areas and finally you ended up in PhD. I do the whole purpose of this page. It started like that. Like I used to get messages at least twice or thrice in a week
Mhm.
from junior, someone who I even don't know, but they are doing masters somewhere, and they'll ping me and like, sir or bhaiya, I'm doing this thing. Would you suggest shall I go for a PhD or shall I go for a job? So, what's your pinch of advice because you are just entering? What motivated you, and what would you like to give back?
I think that's a hard question, just because I personally don't feel qualified to give
Yeah.
advice in that way. I mean, for me, I think what motivates me is my curiosity about the world. And I think if you have the curiosity, I think you should follow it. And I think the path is not always easy. I mean, it certainly was not easy for me to find all of the opportunities that I've been lucky to have. But I think it's resilience and persistence and determination to do the things that you want to do. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is to ask. I think a lot of people are really afraid to ask because they might think that the answer is no or whatever. I mean, if you don't ask, right, the answer is no. But if you do ask, I
Yeah.
mean, you have the ability to open up a conversation about what it is that you want. Maybe this opportunity isn't a good fit, but you might find something else through that opportunity. That has definitely happened to me. I mean, I sort of fell into my master's degree. It was not something that I like knew that I was going to go to Université Laval for my master's degree, but it was an opportunity that came to me, and I was like, wow, this is an interesting project, and I decided to take it. Um, but I think that is probably one of the bigger pieces of advice that I can give, is to ask for what you want, and like, not be discouraged just because one person says no does not mean that it's the end of the line, right? There's still so many other people to ask, and there's so many other opportunities that are there. Yeah, and follow your curiosity, right? Like, do the projects that you are interested in, because that's where I think you will start to shine. And I think that is what keeps you from necessarily, I mean, it's hard, right? Academics are really, really tough, and they require a lot of sacrifice.
Persistence.
And I think, yeah, they require a lot of sacrifice. And I think if you're sacrificing a lot for something that you don't necessarily like, it can be a really painful process. And so I think it's to stay true to yourself and to ask for the opportunities that you want. Yeah.
Oh, such a lovely and beautiful take-home message, I would say.
Thanks.
Quite insightful. And I think that's it. It was really amazing
Yeah.
talking to you. And a whole lot of experience, which was quite refreshing. Seems like I've been to polars, Arctic and Antarctic.
Yeah, I jokingly say that I'm bipolar, you know, working in both,
No, you have all
poles.
the rights. You have all the rights to say that.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Sneha, and thank you so much everyone who joined. And I wish you all the very best. And I am looking forward to seeing reading your
Thanks.
literature, your papers on phytoplankton diatoms and how climate is affecting, how temperature is driving them.
That's
So all
so
the
kind.
best,
Thank you
and
so
thank you
much.
so much.
And thanks for having me on your page. This is so cool, and I'm really happy to participate. So thank you so much again for inviting me and having the time to have this cool conversation. So I'm really glad to be a part of this.
Yeah, it was amazing. Thank you so much, and thank you so much everyone who joined in. And this recording will be here. And if anyone is having anything doubt or something regarding Alfred Wegner Institute regarding a topic, they are free to DM you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank
Feel
you.
free. Yeah, I'm very, I'm very nice in the DMs.
Okay. Okay, Sneha. Have a good time. Have a
You
good day.
too.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye bye. Bye everyone.